Appreciate the comments that were made by my colleague from North Carolina. It's even more meaningful to me because all during the time that the regulations were coming on, I happened to be the one who was chairing the Environment and Public Works Committee, and we were knowing what was going to happen. But I'm almost speechless when I think about the success. You know, we went 20 years only taking up one CRA. And then we end up passing 14 of them, all but one. Now it's a huge success record. Now so people understand it, this gives the opportunity for people who are answerable to the public, people who are elected and have to stand for elections, to have a part in what is sometimes considered to be the action of an unelected bureaucrat. So we've had great opportunities here, and I think the midnight regulations, that's a term that's used quite often. So a party going out of office, such as President Obama, being a very proud liberal, I might add, wanted to get as many of his rules in at the last minute, and we were able to come in and pass these in the time required. To pass 14 of these, in addition to the other regulations, the other method of doing regulations, which I do want to address a little bit, it was just not something that we really anticipated would have happened. Now, I'm particularly proud because mine was the first CRA to be passed in 20 years. And that was the very first one that came from what President Obama wanted, and that had to do with the oil and gas industry. But the fact that, you know, nothing has passed in that long period of time to show now that people are recognizing that we who stand for election should be involved in this process of doing away with these regulations. Now, the rule that I had, that was the first one that the president signed, we had a great signing ceremony, I enjoyed it very much, was one that affected the oil and gas industry. It was this SEC ruling of the Obama administration that said that if you are a domestic producer of oil and gas, of course that's the private sector, you have to release all the information that you're using in producing a bid against maybe another country. So we use an example. For example, in China, it's not in the private sector like it is here in the United States. Their oil and gas business is in the public sector. So they would have a distinct advantage. And quite frankly, it's consistent with what the previous President Obama, had in his war on fossil fuels. Fossil fuels are coal, oil, and gas. And he was very proud to be opposed to coal, oil, and gas, and frankly, nuclear too. I've often wondered, you know, I go back to Oklahoma with virtually every weekend that I don't have to be in one of the war zones or someplace like that. And I go there really for my therapy because they ask questions that make sense. You don't get these questions in Washington. In Woodham, I remember in Shattuck, Oklahoma, the other day I was there and he said, now explain this to me. We have a President Obama that wants to do away with fossil fuels. He wants to do away with nuclear energy. Now, we're dependent upon fossil fuels, coal, oil, and gas, and nuclear energy for 89% of the power it takes to run this machine called America. Now, if he's successful in doing away with it, how do we run this machine called America? Well, I'm proud to say that the war against fossil fuels is over, and the particular CRA that I had came out of the Dodd-Frank Act. And by the way, overregulation is overregulation. And when I talk to people back in my state of Oklahoma, if they're in the banking business or financial services business, they're concerned about the overregulation that comes from Dodd-Frank. If they're farmers, they're concerned about the regulation that would take the jurisdiction of regulating our water resources out of the states and put it in the federal government. And so that's what this was all about. And so I'll tell you how serious this was. The CRA that I had was so significant that the federal courts came in July of 2013 and said that the SEC made several errors in rushing this this regulation through, and they actually vacated the rule. Well, that was a major accomplishment. I was very proud to have the courts on my side for a change. Anyway, the SEC finalized a second rule under the authority of Dodd-Frank's Section 1504 by making some, without any real substantial changes, and nonetheless, this was the one that he first signed. So, thanks to the Congressional Review Act, our oil and gas companies are not at a disadvantage when they're competing with state-owned oil and gas companies such as we have in China. We've passed other critical CRAs that tied the hands of our businesses and took local control away from the states. A lot of people are in America, and I think a higher percentage of my people in Oklahoma are really concerned about Second Amendment rights. And of course, we had one of the regulations that went through affected Second Amendment rights. If you talk about the farmers and the ranchers, and not just in my state of Oklahoma, we are a farm state, but throughout America, they'll tell you that their problems, their number one concern was, and I asked the Farm Bureau representative this, he said the greatest problem facing farmers is not anything that's found in the Ag Bill. It is the overregulation of the EPA, and specifically what they call the WOTUS bill. The WOTUS bill is the one I just mentioned, would take the jurisdiction away from the state and give it to the federal government. And that's something that, you know, I have to say this, when you talk about liberals, that's not a negative term. It's a reality. It's you know, how much power should be in the hands of the federal bureaucrats as opposed to individuals and the states. And so we have a lot of these regulations, and one of the things that the CRA has done is taken away an excuse that people will use, and I'm talking about people in this chamber who are legitimately liberals and believe that we should have more control in Washington. It takes the power away from the federal bureaucrats, because what they can do is go ahead, pass the regulations, and then go back at home, and when people are yelling and screaming about being overregulated back in their home states, they can say, don't blame me, blame the unelected bureaucrats. Well, a CRA takes away that excuse, because it forces them to actually get on record. So as chairman of the Senate Committee on Environment and Public Works, we were involved with more of these regulations than any other committee, because that's what we do for a living there. And so I was very happy to see that all the successes that we had. And let me just mention, because I don't think it's been mentioned before, and I'm going to submit this for the record, there are two ways of doing away with these regulations. One is through executive orders. I think everybody knows that. But they don't realize what has already been done. We've had, I think, a total of 31, I believe it is now, of regulations that have been done away with, either through executive orders or through the Congressional Review Act. Some of the executive orders, for example, the WOTUS, that's the one we've been talking about. The energy that repeals the Clean Power Plan, that was something that's officially ended the war on fossil fuels, I might add. The executive order on rebuilding the military, the executive order on the Keystone and Dakota Access pipelines. We're all familiar with that and the debate that's been going on. And then some of the CRAs that really aren't talked about too much, and we're talking about regulations that came from the Obama administration that now have been done away with through the use of CRAs. The educational rule mandating federal standards for evaluating teacher performance, the education rule establishing a national school board with an effort to get away from the local control of the schools, the interior rule that blocked Alaska control of their own hunting and fishing in that beautiful state, the Social Security rule that put seniors on a gun ban list, Second Amendment rights. So all of these things are very significant, and I'm very proud of, quite frankly, of this body. With the exception of one, we passed all 14 of the CRAs. And I can't think of any time that that's been done in the past. So it was a great thing. It did put the power back in the hands of the people who are elected here. And I'm very glad to have been a participant in that. With that, I do want to ask unanimous consent that I include at the time of my remarks the list, the complete list that I have here of the Congressional Review Act resolutions passed and the Trump executive actions.
Without objection.
And with that, I'll yield the floor and suggest